Hello everyone. Today we'll be looking at data modeling. If you're yet to subscribe to this YouTube channel, please do well to subscribe, like our videos, leave your questions on the comment section, and turn on the notification bell so that you can get notification for subsequent videos. There is no how we'll talk about database design without talking about data modeling. Now, what is data modeling? Data modeling is like a blueprint of a database that is about to be implemented. Now, before we go into implementing a database, we must first of all have in hand a particular blueprint of what we want to implement. Now, for us to get our data model right, we make use of some kind of text, some text, some symbols to represent the entities, the attributes, and the relationship. Now, there is no how we'll be talking about data modeling without talking about key concepts like entity, like attribute, like instance, like constraint, like relationship, and of course, business rule. Because it is from the business rule that we get to determine what should be an entity, what should be an attribute, which kind of relationship does each of the entity relate. Then we name our constraint and bring in our instances. Okay, let's look at entity. When we talk about entity, you should think of entity as a noun. It could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a thing, it could be a concept, it could be an event. Now, if we must represent entity in our model, we make use of a rectangle. We make use of a rectangle, then we write the name of the entity inside the rectangle. Okay, let's say we have student entity. So this represents entity student. Okay, let's look at the next one, which is attribute. Attributes are simply the characteristics of the entity. So before you can call something a particular kind of entity, there's some kind of characteristics it must possess. For example, if you say you are a student, we expect you to have a student registration number. We expect you to belong to a particular department. We expect you to belong to a particular level, either this is your first year, your second year, or your final year. We expect you to belong to a particular program. Now, there are tons of attributes that we expect a student to have. But if you don't have these key attributes that we have listed here, then you shouldn't be a student entity, because it is these characteristics that makes you a student entity. When we look at living things, we have characteristics that make a particular thing to be said to be called a living thing. So if that thing you're calling a living thing doesn't have those attributes, there is no how you can call it a living thing. Now remember that we said entity is a noun. Now we can also say attributes are adjectives, because we use attributes to define our noun. We use adjective to define noun, we use attribute to define our entity. Now, in the database, we have database objects. Now, the table that is one of the database objects. Now, the table is an entity. Okay, then the fields in the table, the fields in the table, or the column in the table are the attributes. Now, this is a table. The table itself is is an entity. Then when you begin to bring serial number here, range number here, department here, level here, now you see you're putting these things in the columns, in the fields. Now these make up the attributes for the table. So whichever entity fits in here is what we are going to record here. The next one here is attributes. Attributes are the example of the entity. They are simply the rows or the records that makes up the table. Now, when we begin to fill this our table, let's say student 1, reg number 011, department is CS, level is third here, then program and the rest. Now, when we begin to fill this thing that we are filling now are the records. They are the instance. They are the tuple. So when you hear these three things, they still mean the same thing. So each role that is found in a database table is an instance, or each record that is found in a database table is an instance. Now, some people confuse instance and attribute. Okay, for example, if I say give me an instance of student, and peradventure somebody says name. When you say name, name is not an instance. But when you call the name, let's say the person name is Easy, when you call the name, it becomes the instance. So name here is the attribute, att, while the name here is the instance. So when you say name, you're simply saying calling the attribute, but when you call the name, you're simply saying the instance or the record. Now, just like when you say reg number, you are as well saying the attribute, but when you call the reg number, let's say 001, you are simply saying the instance. Okay, let's look at the next one. The next one is constraint. We have series of constraints. We have check, we have not null, but in this particular video, we'll be looking at just the primary key constraint, which is the PK, and the foreign key constraint. Now, before we go into the primary key and foreign key constraints, what is simply constraint? Constraints are restrictions placed on data. I don't know if you filled a form online before and peradventure you missed to fill some particular text box, and when you click on submit, you see those text box colored red telling you field required. Now, it would have submitted the empty text for you, but because there's a particular constraint there saying that you must enter something before it can be submitted to the database. So there's a constraint that says that you can't, there's a constraint there that is saying that you cannot enter an empty text. Now, primary key is a particular is a field, or is an attribute that uniquely identifies each instance of an entity. I said primary key is a unique attribute or a unique field that uniquely identifies each instance of an entity. Now, when you make a particular field primary key, the first thing is going to be unique. No other field or no other it's going to be unique. No other field will take that same value you entered there, and you can't leave it empty. It can't be null. It can't take a null value. You must enter something there. If you try not to enter something there, database is going to give an error telling you that you are trying to go against the primary key constraint. Now, foreign keys are duplicate of primary key in another table. I said foreign keys are duplicate of a primary key in another table. So if you have, let's say, for example, we have student table and we have course table. Of course, you know that as a student you must offer a particular course. Now, okay, let's say in the student table we have reg number 001 and we have reg number 002. If in any way we find this particular field, which is the reg number field that is in student, in the course table, it simply means that reg number here is the primary key and the reg number here is the foreign key. It's a duplicate. So if we are entering values for the reg number here, it must take these same values. We can't enter 001 here and come here and enter 01. No, our database is going to flag an error because it must have the same kind of record. That is why we can say that the primary key help us to ensure entity integrity, while the foreign key help us to ensure referential integrity, because the foreign key makes reference of the primary key and the primary key says no, you can't enter a null value. Okay, relationship are simply the association between entities. Relationship are the association between entities. Now we have three basic types of relationship. We have the one-to-one relationship, we have the one-to-many, we have the many-to-many relationship, and there's a way we represent all these things, which I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, if we must represent a one-to-one relationship, we make use of one as one. So we do 1 to 1. This is how we represent it. Then we do 1 to many. We use m for many, and we do many to many. So if you see this anywhere, simply know that this is a many to many, this is a one to many, and this is a one to one. Now let's go back and look at what each of them says. Now, one-to-one relationship simply means that or simply states that one instance of entity A can relate with one instance of entity B, and one instance of entity B can relate with only one instance of entity A. Now they gave a very good example here, telling us about president and country. Okay, let's say here we have president, and here we have country. We have president 1, president 2, president 3. We have president A, and we have we have country A, we have country B, and we have country C. So if president A is the president of country B, country B cannot have president 2 as its president, but it must also have president 1 as its president. So that is a one-to-one relationship. The next one says one to many. One to many is a situation whereby one instance of entity A relates with one or more of entity B, and one instance of entity B can only relate with one instance of entity A. Okay, let's look at school and department. That's a very good example. School and department, or let's say faculty and department. Okay, let's say we have our schools here, and we have our departments here. Okay, let's say we have school of engineering. That is our number one school. We have school of sciences. We have industrial and applied sciences. We have school of business. Then we have the com courses. Let's say we have com 1, com 2. We have the engineering courses, engineering 1, engineering 2. We have the business courses, B1, forgive my writing. We have B1 and we have B2. Okay, let's say this particular school and this particular department. Now let's say department school 1 can have this department and can also have this department. This department cannot belong to school 2. Neither can this one to belong to school 2. But this department can only belong to school 1. So if you check now, here now we have one instance relating to one instance of A relating to many instances of B, and one of B can only relate to one of A. Then the last one is many to many relationship. Now that one states that one instance of entity A can relate with one instance of entity B, and one instance of entity B can also relate with many of A. As a student, you are going to offer many courses. You offer different courses in your department. Then a particular course you offer in your department cannot only be offered by you, it will also be offered by other students. So there we have a many to many relationship. Okay, now in modeling or in data modeling, how if we must represent our relationships, this is how we do it. Remember we said that we have one to one, one to many, and many to many. So we have successfully mentioned one and many. So if a relationship is one, we make use of one. If a relationship is many, we make use of either greater than or less than, depending on where the entity is facing. Now, this relationship we're talking about can either be mandatory or optional. So if a relationship is mandatory, that is, it is a must, then we have one to represent it. And if a relationship is optional, we have 0 to represent it. So that means we can have mandatory one relationship, we can have optional one relationship, and we can have mandatory many relationship, and we can also have optional many relationship. So all those things are very, very important. You have to take note of it because this will help us to model our relationships and very well. Okay, now let's look at the last one. Then we draw a simple model of a student relating to course. Business rule. Now, business rule is a precise, unambiguous description of how a particular organization operates. Now, this description is what will determine what will be an entity and what will be an attribute. Business rule is a brief, precise, and unambiguous description of how a particular organization operates. So, for you to always get your model right, you always have to pay attention to your business rule. Pay attention to what is being described, because what is being described is what will determine what will be the entity, what will be the attribute, what the relationship will be, what we're going to make to be our constraint, and so on and so forth. For example, if we are describing a book, let's say we're describing a book. Now, of course, we should know that book has different characteristics like book title, page number, chapters, ISBN number, and it also have author. Now, author here now is an attribute of book because we are describing book. But if we come to describe author, then book will now become an attribute to author. Now, There is no how you say you are an author when you have not written any book. So one of the attributes that makes you an author is the books you have written. And you cannot say you are a book when you have not been authored. So depending on what we describe, if we describe book, author comes in as an attribute, and if we describe author, book comes in as an attribute. So we must always pay attention to what is being described. Okay, now let's look at a good relationship here between student and course. So if we have student here, this is a rectangle, and we have student, and let's say we have course here. We have course here. So in my school, where I school, students, as a particular student, you must, is mandatory that you offer many courses, and it's also mandatory that a particular course that you offered is being offered by other students in your level and in that same department. So we have a many to many relationship. Now, it is very, very possible for us to implement this. But if we implement this, we're going to encounter so many redundancies, and this will not help us to ensure what we call entity integrity or data integrity. So here, for us to solve this problem, we have to bring in what we call an associative entity that will help us to solve this problem of redundancies. So we'll bring in an associative entity and we'll model it this way. Okay, remember it was a many to many, so we'll have it like this, like this. This is like a conventional way of doing it. The relationship that was here, you bring it down here. The one that was here, you also bring it down here. Then here now we'll have a mandatory one and a mandatory one here. So we have successfully broken down the many to many relationship into one to many, one to many. Now you may be asking, what will now be the name of our associative entity? The name is usually user defined, but it must relate to the parent entities. Now we're talking about student and course. So here we can, somebody can say, I want to name my associative entity student course. Somebody can say offered courses. Somebody can say course form. It is your choice. But whatever name that you want to give to it must relate to these parent entities. Okay, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, like our videos, turn on the notification bell so that you can get subsequent videos. And if there be any question on this video, please do well to drop your questions on the comment section.